You know something, guys? When people have been discussing on how this episode really affects them when it comes to those certain favorite characters being portrayed differently, while in the alternative route that would have happened if Chris Savino didn't do any sexual harassment towards co-workers from other studios, where we would have seen the whole endgame between Lincoln and Gore Jordan. I'm not gonna lie, I'm disappointed for the results that we ended up getting instead of the Chris Savino route, but in all honesty, I don't really blame the people who made these decisions. Granted, I'm gonna get to them when I get to them, but for now, this comparison video of the Loud House Flame on You with the Casagrandes Dial M for Mustard centers around the characters going through a mystery on one of their friends being framed over something they didn't do, while in the Casagrandes episode centers around the characters trying to search for the stolen hot dog cart that was supposed to be used for a hot dog eating contest. The character who got framed in the Loud House episode is Rusty, while the victim's stolen hot dog cart is Bruno. This leads to the characters going through investigations towards the other characters from school and in Big City, in Great Lake City. Unfortunately, they got no answers since that all of them are the victims who didn't cause anything to frame on the person or stole the hot dog cart. Since the end of the video that I've uploaded last Sunday, I talked about Carl being a detective or an investigator, and this is the episode that I was referring to. To tell you the truth, since this is literally one of the character traits that Carl has, and it's mainly him just trying to get some money or mainly just doing detective work because he likes detective work, then I have to admit that his comedy throughout this episode is entertaining, and since that Wang Yan is a main character in this episode, it actually works with the whole sibling dynamic between Carl and Wang Yan. Granted, the dynamics in the Casagrandes are mostly mixed, but for me personally, this dynamic is not that bad. So, in comparison to the Loud House episode, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to make a Royal Woods middle school episode centering around the students, and this is obviously the Lincoln and Friends group episode, which centers around getting their friends unsuspended. But to tell you the truth, since that this episode also leads to the infamous bit towards the end where we get to see the culprit in all this, let's just say there's a reason onto why this episode isn't one of the best, nor one of the most underrated of Season 5. It's no surprise that Season 5 is literally the turning point for the fan base itself. Like, Season 4 may have been a turning point, but considering that the changes that they did, I can guarantee you that if the fans sticked around even after school and they witnessed this episode centering around one of the most favorite side characters, then I'm pretty sure they won't be able to like the outcome of what the producers and people did in this episode with the direction that they took in comparison to Chris Savino's direction. Granted, I don't blame them for taking the direction, but at the same time, judging of how the system in Royal Woods Middle School is really low and difficult to function in comparison to the original school Lincoln and the Yellows went through, I can't tell if what consequences these characters get are meaningful or really not meaningful at the end of the day. Mainly the fact that nothing happens to these characters, and whenever something happens to these characters, it's mainly out of plot convenience or mainly done at bad timing. Mainly the Lincoln Loud episodes. Well, sometimes. For the Casagrandes episode, since it came out before the Loud House episode, the intentions behind it centering around the culprit who stole Bruno's hot dog cart, then I'm not gonna lie, it's really wrong for a character to do that, but considering that it's a one-of-a-kind by a person who knows how to make the food way better than anyone else, or sometimes even like everyone else, but with a different taste, then believe me, I'm pretty sure that the culprit in this episode couldn't resist the temptation of the hot dogs that Bruno made. And to be truthful, the investigation in the Casagrandes episode is a lot more entertaining because the characters aren't dumbed down, and while the characters from the Loud House episode aren't dumbed down, I honestly found it really weird that they just didn't realize that the real culprit is the one that they're mostly familiar with. Granted, it's not one of the most stupidest things that the Loud House characters have done, but at the same time, it still bothers me. So anyway, the characters from the Casagrandes learned that the person who stole Bruno's hot dog cart is a guy in a hot dog costume. So once they capture him, it's revealed that Vito, along with his dogs, are the ones who stole Bruno's hot dog cart because he doesn't want Bruno to win the contest in order to go to Vino for a tasting tour. Let me just say this for a fact that considering that out of all the times I've seen characters do stuff terrible, to tell you the truth, Vito, after talking about his character from the Casagrandes episode equivalent to Space Invader, I really felt like that his intentions, like I said before, while wrong, is understandable. And with Bruno still winning just when the others managed to get the hot dog cart back in time, he decides to take Vito with him. I'm gonna be truthful with you guys, as much as that there's no consequences towards Vito. Believe me when I say this isn't as bad in comparison to what the culprit did from the Loud House episode. And you pretty much knew who the culprit is. Go Jordan. You know, knowing of how that people really wanted characters from past seasons of the show to come back, they didn't expect Go Jordan to do something like this. But if you really think about it, this is one of the rare occasions where the show decides to use an old character from old seasons rather than using the new character since season 5 came around, and this is a season 5 episode. But to tell you the truth, I honestly wanted Girl Jordan to be part of Lincoln's friend group like I did in my fanfics, and knowing of how she's portrayed like this, even if she didn't turn out the worst after this episode, other than not being part of Lincoln's friend group, it's honestly a shame that she's been reduced into being the person who framed Rusty. The reason Girl Jordan framed Rusty is mainly the fact that they were partners in cooking class, and their final assignment was making a sponge cake, which Rusty bumped into the oven, causing the oven door to open, and causing the sponge cake to be ruined to the point that it gave Girl Jordan her first F. Which leads to her getting revenge on Rusty by trying to mimic his voice, trying to wear the same outfit and wig as him, and the fact that she was the one who threw the stink bomb at the school party and not Rusty. I need to be perfectly real with you. If you're going to say that this damages Girl Jordan's character, may I remind you that the setting of middle school is literally what really causes this episode to not take itself too seriously. Because if Chris Savino wrote this episode, even if he didn't want to, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't wanted Girl Jordan to go over the top with flaming Rusty over a mistake that he caused. Like, granted, Rusty was really at fault of causing Girl Jordan to take actions into her own hands, but if you really think about it, if Chris Savino had limitations when it comes to these characters, he will probably do something a lot more severe than what we ended up getting, mainly the environment of middle school. Like, I know his original intentions were never to have Lloyd be in college, even though it may be debatable if he actually knew what he was doing, if he stayed in production, mainly having the kids go to middle school and whatnot. It just really feels like that these changes wouldn't be the same or how they were right now if Chris Savino was still in charge. And if you ask me, this isn't what really damages Gold Jordan's character, but what really damages her character is the fact that she didn't got what Chris Savino was planning. That's pretty much one of the biggest downsides when it comes to the modern Loud House seasons, is the fact that we didn't get the end game of Lincoln and Gold Jordan being paired up, and since I'm a shipper between the two, it's really depressing. But if you ask me, if the writers were taking this episode a lot more seriously and actually trying a little harder than what they did with this episode, then this episode would have been much more better. But at the same time, it just really feels really depressing that every single character in this episode isn't really taking this situation seriously despite being an investigation episode. I understand that this isn't supposed to be like a serious investigation or a detective story in comparison to the Casagrandes episode, since it's been toned down. Well, there's no hot dog cuts and others, but if you ask me, knowing full well that this is mainly a down-to-earth episode rather than a fantasy episode, it's honestly disappointing that this episode ended up becoming a lot less appealing rather than entertaining. Like, this episode isn't bad, but in comparison to the Casagrandes episode, this episode would have been better if the execution was a lot more handled. And since that this show isn't going to bother by giving Lincoln a real love interest or mainly someone he can cooperate with, mainly a girl, and while he's friends with Stella, they didn't go anywhere considering that Stella wants to be friends, then it's really disappointing that we're never going to see Jordan Khan becoming a thing, which is what Chris Savino's own intentions were. Let's just say that as much as the victims of sexual harassment deserve to be supportive, the people still should give Gold Jordan some justice rather than giving her what she got in this episode. With that being said, the Casagrandes episode is the superior episode over the Loud House episode. And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that Carl ended up becoming a better detective in comparison to A1, mainly Lincoln's friends in the Loud House episode, it's not really mainly out of pure luck considering of how the execution of the Loud House episode is what's dragging it down from being a good episode. Like, you can make the argument that this episode is what it is and it's not supposed to be an important episode in comparison to the other Casagrandes episode, but let's be real with you. Episodes from the Casagrandes are mostly mixed, and after comparing them throughout this year, it's no surprise that the Casagrandes, while being a spin-off and mainly a cash cow, it's not really a bad spin-off. For me personally, the only thing I remember from Flame on You is the fact it gave me inspiration on doing that Loud House Christmas story that I did last year. If you haven't read that, go check it out. It's called A Mistletoe Kiss from a Loud. You won't be disappointed, along with 2 other sequels afterwards. Let's just be real with you that me being a shipper of Lincoln and Gold Jordan is what really gave me the inspiration from this episode alone, but that's not saying much. I'm giving Flame on You a 5.75 out of 10, while the Casagrandes episode gets a 6.75 out of 10.